Configuring failover clustering in Hyper-V 2016. Okay, now it's time to configure a cluster. We have shared LUN between Hyper 1, Hyper 2, and Hyper 3. It's an iSCSI LUN, which is hosted on iSCSI target, and all our Hyper-V servers, Hyper 1, Hyper 2, and Hyper 3, are configured as iSCSI initiator to connect to iSCSI target, and now they can see this LUN. And it's time to configure a cluster so that our VMs can have high availability. And we have VMs on shared storage, so live migration will be much more easier and quicker. Although there is a type of live migration in Hyper-V called shared nothing, where it moves the VM from one Hyper-V local storage to another Hyper-V local storage, but nobody typically use that in production, and that takes a long time. So shared storage is inevitable. It's important. So first thing first, add role features, and I'm in Hyper-V, and I'm gonna go for da, 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 failover clustering feature. Installing failover clustering feature. On first node, which is Hyper 1. So failover clustering is a feature of Windows Server 2016, standard or data center, depends. It's available in both of them. It allows you to configure cluster, failover clusters, and Hyper-V leverage failover clustering features so that you can make your VM highly available. So you have a shared storage, so you can do live migration easy, as well as configure high availability for VM. So in this case, that Hyper 1 gets failed, the VM can be restarted on Hyper 2 because they both uses the shared storage and VM and virtual machine files, configuration files, as well as hard virtual hard disk files like VHDX files are residing on shared storage. So both or also all hosts which are participating in a cluster, they have access to that shared storage. So any host can take ownership of those files and start those VMs. So failover clustering right now, it's getting installed. So while it's getting installed, I will okay, let's finish. Awesome. So what I will do now, as usual, go to failover cluster manager. I hope I'm not forgetting something. Yep. I'll say create cluster, and next I would say hyper1.itsense.com. Yeah, and hyper2.itsense.com. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, my bad. See, I forgot to install failover clustering feature on Hyper 2 and Hyper 3. So what I will do, I will install failover clustering like I did on Hyper 1. So I will do this feature on Hyper 2 and Hyper 3, and I will join and I will resume the video once it's done. Okay, so I'm back. So itsense.com. Come on. Yep. And hyper3.itsense.com. It's taking time for Hyper 3 because the server just been restarted. Okay, let me see if it's come up because it had some updates. Hopefully that sticks, yeah. Hyper 3. Okay, okay. So I have added failover clustering feature to Hyper 2 and Hyper 3 and browse and get those things here. Next. The report, yes, run the configuration validation desired. There's nothing wrong with this. It will run some test. I don't mind. Let it run all test. And it's performing some test about the cluster validation. So Hyper 1, Hyper 2, Hyper 3, these are the three Hyper-V nodes. I'm currently um, making Hyper-V cluster. It will be consist of these three nodes. And as you know, it will be even number, odd number of nodes. So what will happen? The quorum won't play major part in it because we have odd number of nodes, three. If I have two nodes, then I can use a witness like disk disk as a witness, or you know, or file share witness or something. But as I'm using three servers or three nodes in a cluster, so the quorum will be relevant. I mean, it won't play a major role, won't play a role. Quorum will work as a tiebreaker when you have even number of nodes, you know. You need to have a majority, 50, more than 50%. So far so good. You may give us few warnings, which is will be fine. So what I will do at the moment, I will pause this video and I will be back when it's done. Okay, so all testing has completed, and most of them all success except a warning because it says not all servers have the same update level, which is right. Hyper 3 just recently got some updates, but that's fine. I okay. Cluster name. I'll say hyper cluster. So I would say hyper cluster 1 and IP address I would like to give dot 230, let's. All right. Hypercluster 1, 3 nodes, DNS and Active Directory domain service 230, add all eligible storage, next, and now the cluster is getting configured. So we are creating Hyper-V cluster, which will consist of 3 Hyper-V nodes, Hyper 1, Hyper 2, and Hyper 3. All 3 are Hyper-V hosts. And why we are creating clusters, so we can use advanced features like high availability and live migration and all that stuff. All right. And successfully completed. And say OK. And this is the Hyper-V cluster, hypercluster. Cluster disk 1 online, as you can see, L1. And server name. And these are our nodes. So as you can see, our cluster, hypercluster1.itsense.com is ready. It has 3 nodes, Hyper 1, Hyper 2, and Hyper 3. And as far as the disk is concerned, you'll notice that one of the disk, which is the shared disk, the iSCSI disk, which was 100 gig, Wizard has automatically configured this disk as a disk witness, a quorum disk for cluster, which is sort of, if you ask me, it's a little insane. Because first of all, I have 3 nodes, which means I have odd number of nodes and 3 nodes. So I can still tolerate the failure of one of Hyper-V node, right? So I really don't think it's a good idea, but I really don't need disk witness unless I have like an even number of nodes or something. So, and let's say, suppose even if I want to configure it, I don't want to give it 100 gigs, right? 1 gig disk space should be more than enough because it's just for witnessing, you know. So, what I would like to do, I would like to reclaim this disk back and I would like to use this disk as a clustered shared volume where I can keep my VMs. Another thing is also I have taken the liberty and the background. I have added these 2 hard drives or 2 iSCSI virtual disks, iSCSI LAN 2, which is 150 gigs, and another quorum virtual disk, which is 1 gig. I would like to use this one instead as a quorum disk. That's 1 gig in size rather than the 100 gig one. So how to change that? One option is initially when you configure a cluster, just add a quorum disk and don't create another volume. And in the future, add more volumes and use cluster shared volume. But let's say you end up in a situation like this and you want to free up this space, right? So one option is, of course, what we can do, as I have odd number of nodes and I don't have any VM running on shared storage yet. So I can do one of the two ways. One way is add the quorum disk, right? Change the quorum disk from this to another one, right? Or another option is just remove the quorum disk at all and do reconfiguration, which I will do. And I can do that because I have three hosts, three nodes, and currently nothing on the shared disk or anything. So I will right click the cluster and more actions, configure cluster quorum settings. And in this wizard next, I will say advanced quorum configuration. And I would say don't configure quorum witness. And that's it. So if I go after this, go to disk, it's changed from cluster disk quorum witness to available storage. So what I can do now, I can select this one and now add it as cluster shared volume. So I will highlight this disk and select, click on add to cluster shared volumes. And now it became the cluster shared volume where I can keep my VMs. Now, as I have already added two drives, as I said here, so if I go to Hyper-V1, Hyper-1 disk management and refresh, oh, I don't have to because I can already see them. As you can see, these are offline and this is offline. So what I will do at the moment, let's start off with this one. I'll bring it online and create a simple volume and I'll call it, let's say quorum. And this one, which is the 150 gig one, I will say 1, 2. If you don't see after refresh, you may need to refresh in your iSCSI initiator properties. So once it's done, I go back to cluster manager, or sorry, failover cluster manager, and say add disks. It will see, it will be able to recognize or detect these two disks. So I will add both of them. Now it avails as available storage, right? So what I will choose the cluster disk 2, which is 150 gigs, and add it also to cluster shared volumes. So I have now two iSCSI LUNs ready for my VMs. As far as the disk 3 is concerned, this one, which is 1 gig, what I will do, I will again highlight the cluster, more action, configure cluster quorum settings. Next, select the quorum witness, configure disk witness. Again, I don't really have to do this, but let's make it happy. It's just a matter of 1 gig anyway. So here it is. We have a witness disk, which is 1 gig, and we have two cluster shared volumes, and we have three nodes ready to roll. It's Hyper-V cluster. So this is it. That's how you create Hyper-V cluster. This is how you create almost any cluster in using failover clustering. Hyper-V is just one of the role. And of course, in next video, we will cover that how to configure this highly available virtual machine. And if you have already a virtual machine running on local storage on Hyper-V, how to move those virtual machines from local storage to clustered shared storage or clustered shared volume. So this is it, guys. Take it easy, and I will see you in another video. Cheers.